fighting game without a health bar, you say? What madness is this? Today we are reviewing Die by the Blade, a 1v1 weapon-based fighter coming to us from Grindstone, Triple Hill Interactive, and Toko Midori Games. Is Die by the Blade an honorable addition to your fighting game library, or does it fall on its own sword? Let's find out in our full review. Before we get into it, why not give us the honor of continuing to bring you independent content free of the echo chambers of gaming? Head over to patreon.com/idreamofindiegames and you'll gain Discord access to the greatest indie gaming community, early ad-free shows, shoutouts at the end of every single video we produce, an exclusive podcast, and even free games depending which tier you select. Your new indie gaming community is waiting for you. 1997 saw the release of Bushido Blade, a third-person fighter that became known and respected for its one-hit kills, realistic weapon variety, and surprisingly large interactive environments. There really wasn't much like it on the market back then, and it garnered enough of a fandom to earn a sequel just a year later. I personally enjoyed this series, so when I heard about Die by the Blade, I was excited to see a spiritual successor of sorts was being created. While Die by the Blade nails some of the core fundamentals that made the combat of Bushido Blade fun and engaging, it cuts a lot of corners in the process. If you were expecting any sort of story in Die by the Blade, you'll be greatly disappointed. Die by the Blade's slim cast of characters have seemingly no reason behind their actions and are only given a small blurb of background information via the game's character customization section. There's no overarching plotline of any value here, and the game has absolutely no story mode to speak of at the time of this review. Not that fighting games are often celebrated for their deep lore and narratives, but at least some context would have been nice. Instead, we get 7 bland, rather faceless warriors with little reason to grow attachment towards any of them. Die by the Blade isn't just light on characters, it severely lacks content in general, at least at launch. For offline modes, players will be able to choose between either versus or tournament. The versus mode is exactly what it sounds like, allowing you to battle either an AI opponent or one of your friends locally. The tournament mode allows for 8 combatants, which can be a mix of AI and real-life players. Here you'll be able to participate in a bracket-style tournament, unsurprisingly. This mode is not unlocked initially, but will be gained fairly early on. On the topic of unlocking content, doing so in Die by the Blade is simply a matter of playing and gaining experience, which will increase your overall player level. Points are also earned that will allow you to purchase banners and cosmetics for fighters. Most everything of major importance can be unlocked in about an hour or two of playing. Online modes include duels, tournaments, ranked duels, and ranked tournaments, along with leaderboards where you can measure how you stack up against the competition. Sadly, I was unable to test the online modes at the time of this review as no players were available, but I can say with confidence that the online play will be crucial to the game's overall success and longevity. Much like the cast of characters, there are not a lot of different weapons, but at least Die by the Blade offers authentic Japanese swords and staffs that all play differently from one another. In terms of single-player content, don't expect much either. Built-in tutorials do a decent job of showing you the ropes, as does a practice mode, but the only other single-player offering available at the time of this review was a self-proclaimed challenges mode. In all honesty, this mode felt more like a survival mode than any sort of real challenges, and it didn't offer much in the way of entertainment value. While it's obvious Die by the Blade doesn't offer all that many modes, some of its shortcomings can be forgiven through what is a fairly decent combat engine. This is where the developers clearly spent most of their time and energy, and with some success. While navigating menus can feel like a bit of a chore due to the clunky interface, when you are battling an opponent, the UI is rather basic. As I alluded to at the start of this review, fighters have no life bars, but they do have what is referred to as a resolve bar. Each action you perform in battle will lower your resolve, though your resolve will restore over time as you keep your distance and avoid attacking. Resolve can also be restored through successfully parrying attacks. You won't want to let your resolve drop too low, as this will disable the ability to auto-block and will also slow down your overall offense. The resolve system is simple enough to understand and an important element to keeping your head attached to your body. You can also set the number of lives you have per battle, which will be indicated on screen. Lives are essentially what the game refers to as rounds. And remember, according to the devs, players with no more lives loses the fight, so try not to lose the fight. Kidding aside, the combat itself feels quite quick and responsive, relying on the player to utilize 3 different stances and to strike their foes at the right moment. A high, mid, and low stance is available, with an on-screen indicator revealing which stance you or your opponent are currently in. The stance system does take a bit of getting used to and has its own little intricacies, but is enjoyable enough to engage with overall. Switching stances is as simple as flicking a stick, and attacking, if if using an Xbox controller as I was, merely involves using the right bumper for horizontal attacks and the right trigger for vertical attacks. Matching the correct stance to your opponents will allow for you to block, while being in the incorrect stance usually leads to an abrupt and oftentimes hilarious death. All of this is to say that Die by the Blade is not a brainless button masher per se. The game demands some degree of skill and precision. Gameplay becomes a bit more complicated when exploring advanced techniques such as linking together attacks and stances to perform various combinations. Long story short, if you manage to pull off a linked attack, you'll be able to bust through your opponent's defenses in no time. You'll also be using less resolve in the process. Despite pulling from such a small set of buttons on the controller, I did find that the link attacks were rather difficult to execute. And outside of linking, even more advanced attacks exist such as feinting, which is a way to trick your opponent into thinking you're going to attack them. Parrying is simple enough when compared to some of the more advanced techniques, and when successfully executed results in an epic clash of weapons accompanied by a shower of sparks that fill the screen to satisfying effect. Outside of parrying, players can also roll either away from their foes or towards them to execute a quick and surprising attack should they catch their opponent off guard. There are even finishers, which, while difficult to perform and never reaching the over-the-top hilarity found in many of the Mortal Kombat series fatalities, are quite satisfying to watch nonetheless. Factoring everything, I thought Die by the Blade's combat was entertaining at times, even if the majority of my matches against AI opponents and Silent Signs, who was nice enough to help me, ended in 5 to 15 seconds. Unexpectedly decapitating your nemesis or slicing off their arm or even their foot may be jarring for players more accustomed to longer bouts prevalent in traditional fighting games. Sure, a lot of fighting games have rounds that last maybe 30 seconds or less, but this is even shorter than that most of the time. I think another nice touch to this game would have been the ability to see your players limp around a bit more and try to fight through their wounds. Instead, Die by the Blade's battles really come down to who lands that one critical hit which ends the match fairly abruptly most of the time in my experience. The game is more about studying your opponent than it is using your surroundings. Yes, only a small handful of stages are available, with the vast majority of them feeling bland, lifeless, and boring despite looking pretty. I found no trees to chop down, no dirt to kick up, nor items to toss at my challengers. A bit of interactivity in the level design could have added an extra element of fun and strategy to the battles, though I understand they were kinda going for realism here. Even still, it is decidedly more fun to play with a friend as opposed to fighting against AI opponents. Many times I found the AI pretty cheap and difficult to defeat despite having the option to tweak the difficulty level. This led to me often becoming frustrated with the game as opposed to feeling as if I was learning, which is where the practice mode does come in handy. Visually, Die by the Blade is a decent looking game. The environments don't have much in the way of life or things going on in the background, but they are pretty, as I mentioned earlier. The lighting in the game is nicely done and the character models look fairly decent. Animations in the game are also impressive, though a few instances did occur where the incorrect animation for a character randomly activated, usually upon death. Even still, the visuals mostly deliver, even if they aren't exceptional. Sound design is also solid, with a clash of weapons bringing a satisfying clang, and a soundtrack that flirts with traditional Japanese music at times. The pitter-patter of footsteps and battle cries from characters also work well enough with the overall setting of the game. Die by the Blade is an interesting fighting game that offers some degree of entertainment value in its short burst battles, but is far too light on content to wholeheartedly recommend. While the online modes could potentially give it some extra mileage, the lack of single-player content holds it back from greatness currently. Yes, characters do have different stats, but the roster is small. The stages are pretty, but not very engaging or interactive, and the few extra modes and unlockables that are available just aren't all that compelling. With players being able to unlock almost everything of significant value in just a couple of hours, you'll really just be fighting for some cosmetics at that point. Mostly, you'll be buying in on the hope that the developers continue to add to the game, and that an online community can carry it forward. At every turn, Die by the Blade feels like a double-edged sword.
Oh no!